I am Eleonora, 30 years old, and I spent most of my life feeling invisible in my own family. For decades, I lived in the shadow of my sister Diane, watching as my parents showered her with endless love and privileges, while I bore the weight of blame for everything. 2 years ago, I finally broke free from that toxic cycle and built my own life. Now my phone won't stop ringing with desperate calls from my parents. My perfect sister has become their worst nightmare. Before I tell you how my sister went from golden child to their worst nightmare, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to create boundaries with toxic family members. I grew up in a quiet, tree-lined suburb outside of Detroit, Michigan. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American family. My father, James, worked as an engineering manager at one of the automotive companies, while my mother, Catherine, taught piano lessons from our living room. Our colonial-style home, with its neatly trimmed hedges and seasonal wreaths on the door, projected the image of success and happiness that my parents desperately wanted to maintain. I was their first child, planned and anticipated. According to family stories that were rarely shared, my birth was relatively easy, and my early years were filled with the normal milestones and proud parent moments. But everything changed when I was 3 years old. After what my mother described as medical complications that supposedly made another pregnancy impossible, my sister Diane arrived as their miracle baby. From the moment she came home from the hospital wrapped in a pink blanket my grandmother had specially made, the family dynamic shifted. What began as natural attention for a newborn never rebalanced. As the years passed, it became increasingly clear that Diane wasn't just loved, she was worshipped. I remember my 7th birthday party. My mother had promised I could invite 5 friends for a small celebration with cake and games in the backyard. The day before, Diane, then only 4, had a tantrum because she wasn't getting a party too. By afternoon, my mother had transformed my birthday into a joint celebration with Diane receiving most of the gifts and attention despite it not being her birthday at all. When I quietly mentioned to my father that it was supposed to be my special day, he pulled me aside and sternly told me to stop being selfish and to think about your sister's feelings for once. This pattern repeated throughout my childhood. When I won the spelling bee in 5th grade, my parents attended, but spent the entire ceremony taking pictures of Diane in her new dress. When I made honor roll, the achievement was acknowledged with a distracted, "That's nice, honey," while they enthusiastically celebrated Diane getting a participation award in her dance recital. The first major incident I can recall that crystallized our family dynamic happened when I was 12. I had spent weeks working on a science project about ecosystem development. I had created a detailed terrarium with different layers of plant life and had written a comprehensive report on how the mini ecosystem functioned. The night before it was due, I left it on the dining room table ready to take to school the next morning. I woke up to the sound of glass breaking. Racing downstairs, I found Diane, then 9, standing beside my shattered project. Soil plants and broken glass covered the floor, and my report was soaked with water from the terrarium. "What happened?" I asked, my voice shaking with disbelief. Before Diane could answer, my mother rushed in. She took one look at the scene and turned to me with anger flashing in her eyes. "What did you do, Eleonora? Why would you leave something so fragile where your sister could accidentally bump into it?" "But I didn't." I started to explain. "Don't try to blame your sister," my father interrupted as he entered the room. "You know better than to leave your things out where they could cause problems. Now clean this up before someone gets hurt, and next time be more responsible." As I knelt to pick up pieces of glass, tears streaming down my face, I saw Diane smirking behind my parents' backs. That was the moment I realized that the rules were different for us. I would always be blamed, and she would always be protected. As we grew older, the disparity in our treatment became even more pronounced. By the time I was 14, I was responsible for washing dishes, doing my own laundry, and helping prepare dinner. Diane at 11 had no chores because my parents believed she needed time to just be a child. When I brought home straight A's, my academic success was treated as an expectation rather than an achievement. "That's what you're supposed to do," my father would say dismissively. Meanwhile, when Diane struggled with her grades, my parents hired tutors and rewarded her with gifts for every C she managed to raise to a B. I developed an intense drive to succeed, thinking that if I could just achieve enough, my parents would finally see me. I joined every club, volunteered in the community, practiced piano for hours each day, and maintained perfect grades. But no matter what I accomplished, it was never enough to shift their attention from Diane. This constant dismissal of my efforts and achievements planted seeds of doubt that grew into a forest of insecurity. I developed anxiety that manifested as perfectionism. If I couldn't make a single mistake, maybe then I'd be worthy of the love they so freely gave my sister. I spent nights unable to sleep, replaying every interaction and wondering what I could do differently to earn their approval. What hurt the most was how they never seemed to notice the disparity. When I tried to talk to my mother about my feelings once when I was 13, she looked genuinely confused. "But you're so independent, Eleonora," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Diane needs more support. You should be proud that you're so self-sufficient." That conversation taught me another painful lesson: my strength was being used against me. My ability to cope with neglect had become the justification for continuing to neglect me. High school brought new challenges and more blatant favoritism. While I threw myself into academics, joining debate club and student council, Diane was beginning to show signs of the entitlement my parents had cultivated. When she was 14, Diane's teacher called home because she had been disrespectful in class, talking back and refusing to complete assignments. Rather than addressing her behavior, my parents scheduled a meeting with the principal to complain that the teacher was targeting their daughter and failing to recognize her creative learning style. Around the same time, Diane was caught shoplifting makeup from a local drugstore. The store manager called my parents, but instead of consequences, my mother whispered that it was just a phase, and my father slipped the manager money to take care of any inconvenience. When we got home, the incident was never mentioned again. Meanwhile, when I was late coming home from a student council meeting because the discussion ran over, I was grounded for 2 weeks for breaking curfew and making poor choices about priorities. The most glaring example of the double standard came during my junior year. I had been saving for a car, working weekends at a local cafe to build up enough for a used Honda. My parents had initially promised to match what I saved, as they had done for cousins and family friends. But when I reached my goal, they informed me that they couldn't contribute because they had just spent several $1,000s on a specialized summer arts program for Diane. "You understand, don't you, Eleonora?" my mother said with a smile that expected no argument. "Your sister has such a special talent. We can't let it go to waste." I did understand all too well. My needs would always be sacrificed for Diane's wants. The contrast continued as I approached graduation. When I was accepted to multiple universities with partial scholarships, my parents seemed almost indifferent. "Well, that's good," my father said, barely looking up from his newspaper. "But don't expect us to cover the rest. We've been setting aside money for Diane's education. You know how expensive good art schools can be." This revelation was particularly painful because they had told me for years that they were saving for both of us. I'd chosen my schools and planned my future around the financial support they had explicitly promised. Now, I would need to completely recalibrate my plans. The most telling incident occurred on the weekend of 2 important events: my ceremony to receive a prestigious state scholarship and Diane's dance recital. They were scheduled for the same day, with my ceremony in the morning and her recital in the afternoon, plenty of time for my parents to attend both. But when I came downstairs that morning in my dress ready to leave, I found the house empty. A note on the counter explained that they had gone early to help Diane prepare and would try to make it to my event if they could. They never showed. That weekend was also when the stark difference in our birthdays became impossible to ignore. My 18th birthday had passed the month before with a grocery store cake and a gift card to a bookstore. As I stood watching Diane's elaborate Sweet 16 party with its professional decorations, catered food, and DJ, I felt more invisible than ever. My parents had spent thousands of dollars creating the perfect celebration, inviting what seemed like half the school and presenting Diane with a car not used like the one I had saved for, but brand new with a giant bow on top. During these difficult years, I found solace in unexpected places. Mrs. Jackson, my AP English teacher, became something of a surrogate mentor. She recognized my writing talent and encouraged me to enter competitions, celebrated my successes, and provided the kind of supportive guidance my parents never did. "You have a gift, Eleonora," she told me after class one day, handing back an essay with an A+ and thoughtful comments in the margins. "And more importantly, you have determination. That combination will take you far. Remember that when things get tough." Thomas, my first serious boyfriend during senior year, was another source of support. Unlike friends who had grown used to my family's dynamic and stopped noticing it, Thomas saw the inequity immediately. "That's not normal, Nora," he said after witnessing a particularly uncomfortable family dinner where my parents fawned over Diane while barely acknowledging my presence. "The way they treat you compared to your sister, it's not right." Hearing someone else validate what I had felt for years was both liberating and heartbreaking. It confirmed I wasn't imagining things, but it also forced me to confront the painful reality of my family situation. After graduation, financial reality hit hard. Despite having been promised college funds throughout my childhood, my parents informed me that they had allocated all their education savings to ensure Diane could attend an expensive private arts college when her time came. I was on my own. I enrolled in community college while continuing to live at home, working 2 jobs to pay for tuition and save for transfer to a university. On weekdays, I worked mornings at a cafe before classes, then evenings at a retail store. Weekends were double shifts at the cafe. Despite my exhausting schedule, my parents still expected me to help with household chores while Diane remained exempt. "You're home more, so it makes sense for you to help out," my mother reasoned, ignoring the fact that when I was home, I was usually studying or catching up on sleep between shifts. Those 2 years living at home while attending community college were some of the most challenging of my life. I was physically exhausted, emotionally drained, and constantly reminded of my second-class status in the family. But they also strengthened my resolve to create a different future for myself, one where my worth wasn't determined by comparison to someone else. After 2 grueling years at community college maintaining a perfect GPA while working multiple jobs, I finally transferred to State University 3 hours from my parents' home. This physical distance brought my first taste of real freedom and perspective. My new roommate, Jessica, quickly became more family to me than my actual family had ever been. After living together for just a few months, she understood me better than my parents ever had. When she noticed how I would apologize excessively for minor things, taking too long in the shower, having friends over, even laughing too loudly, she gently called attention to the pattern. "Nora, you know you don't have to say sorry for existing, right? This is your apartment too. You're allowed to take up space." Her words hit me harder than I expected, unleashing tears I'd been holding back for years. That night, sitting on our secondhand couch with mugs of hot chocolate, I told her everything about my family. Instead of dismissing my feelings or suggesting I was overreacting responses I'd grown accustomed to, Jessica was outraged on my behalf. "That's emotional abuse," she said firmly. "What they've been doing to you all these years, it's not okay. Not even a little bit." Meanwhile, back home, the golden child narrative was beginning to show cracks. After just 1 semester at the expensive private college my parents had sacrificed everything to send her to, Diane dropped out. According to my mother's carefully worded explanation, Diane had decided the program wasn't the right fit for her creative vision. The thousands of dollars in non-refundable tuition went unmentioned. Diane moved back home, and my parents immediately transformed her old bedroom into a creative studio where she could explore her artistic potential. When I visited during spring break, I found her lounging around the house at midday, sleeping until noon, while my parents catered to her schedule, preparing special meals whenever she decided she was hungry. These visits home became increasingly difficult. Each time, the contrast between my independent life at university, where I was valued for my contributions and treated with respect, and my invisible status at home, became more stark and painful. The Thanksgiving of my junior year was particularly revealing. I had just been nominated for a prestigious internship and was excited to share the news. But the moment I mentioned it at dinner, Diane interrupted. "God, Eleonora, no one cares about your boring corporate whatever," she said with an eye roll. "Not everyone wants to be a sellout in a pantsuit." Instead of defending me, my parents chuckled indulgently at Diane's creativity and spirit. My father changed the subject to Diane's latest artistic pursuit, photography, which had replaced painting, which had replaced sculpture, which had replaced fashion design, all within the past year. Christmas that year was the final straw for my holiday visits. After saving carefully for months, I had purchased thoughtful gifts for everyone: a vintage watch for my father that matched one his grandfather had owned, a handcrafted scarf for my mother from her favorite artisan shop, and for Diane an expensive set of professional drawing pens she had mentioned wanting. In return, I received what were clearly last-minute afterthought presents: a generic gift card to a store I never shopped at from my parents, and nothing at all from Diane, who claimed with a dramatic sigh that she was too broke to buy gifts this year, despite the new designer handbag she was carrying. Diane, however, was lavished with expensive gifts: a new laptop for her creative projects, a weekend trip to New York for artistic inspiration, and an abundance of clothing and accessories. When I quietly helped my mother clean up the mountains of discarded wrapping paper, she smiled at me and said, "It's so nice to see Diane happy, isn't it? She's been having such a hard time finding herself." It was during my senior year that I met Andrew at a campus fundraiser. Smart, kind, and perceptive, he noticed early in our relationship how I would downplay my achievements and constantly seek validation. "You apologize when you get an A," he observed after I received the highest grade in our shared economics class and immediately dismissed it as just luck. "It's like you're afraid to take credit for your own success." As our relationship deepened, Andrew gently encouraged me to examine the family patterns that had shaped my self-perception. "The way your parents treat you versus your sister, that's not a you problem, Nora. That's a them problem." With Andrew's support and Jessica's continued friendship, I finally gathered the courage to start therapy during my last semester of college. My therapist helped me recognize the deeply ingrained patterns of emotional neglect and scapegoating that had defined my childhood. "What you're describing is a classic family dynamic," she explained. "The golden child versus the scapegoat. Neither role is healthy, but the scapegoat often develops more resilience and independence because they've had to." Graduation day should have been a triumph. Despite working full-time, I was graduating with honors with a job already lined up at a respected marketing firm in the city. My parents did attend, but they spent most of the ceremony on their phones, and during the celebration lunch afterward, the conversation centered almost entirely around Diane's upcoming job interview at a gallery, an opportunity arranged by one of my mother's friends. As I watched my father earnestly advising Diane about interview techniques, while my mother fretted about what she should wear, my recent achievement faded into the background once again. But this time surrounded by Andrew, Jessica, and other friends who genuinely celebrated my success, I felt something different than the usual hurt. I felt pity for my parents who couldn't see the amazing daughter right in front of them. The years following graduation brought significant personal and professional growth as I established my adult life independent of my family's toxic dynamics. My career in marketing took off quickly, with my work ethic and attention to detail earning me a reputation as someone reliable and innovative. Within 18 months, I had received my first promotion, moving from marketing assistant to coordinator, with responsibility for several key accounts. As my professional confidence grew, so did my relationship with Andrew. We moved in together after dating for 2 years, finding a cozy apartment halfway between his job at a software company and my marketing firm. Our home became a sanctuary, the first place where I felt completely safe, valued, and at peace. When Andrew proposed on our 3rd anniversary, I experienced a moment of pure, untainted joy. This wonderful man saw me, truly saw me, and chose me, not as a consolation or an afterthought, but as his first choice and equal partner. My excitement about the engagement was quickly tempered when I shared the news with my parents. I had called them heart-racing with anticipation, only to be met with a lukewarm response. "Oh, that's nice, dear. my mother said, her voice distracted. Have you set a date yet? You should check with us before deciding. Diane has several important gallery events coming up this spring, and we wouldn't want any conflicts. No congratulations. No questions about the proposal or interest in seeing the ring. Just immediate concern about how my life event might inconvenience Diane. Speaking of my sister, her life after dropping out of college had followed a predictable pattern of false starts and abandoned pursuits. She cycled through jobs at alarming speed retail positions that ended when she repeatedly showed up late, receptionist roles she quit because they were beneath her talents, and gallery internships that dissolved when she failed to complete basic tasks. Through it all, my parents continued to support her financially and emotionally, making excuses for her behavior and bailing her out of every self-created crisis. When she totaled her car after driving distracted, they bought her a new one. When she was evicted from her apartment for noise complaints and unpaid rent, they paid the back rent and moved her home again. When she maxed out credit cards on extravagant purchases, they covered the minimum payments to protect her credit score. Meanwhile, every life choice I made was scrutinized and often criticized. When I mentioned putting money toward retirement, instead of buying a house immediately, my father lectured me about financial responsibility, ironic given how they enabled Diane's financial disasters. When I decided to stay with my current company rather than pursuing a slightly higher paying opportunity that would require much longer hours, my mother suggested I lacked ambition. The wedding planning process brought all of these dynamics to a head. From the moment we began organizing our modest but meaningful celebration, my mother attempted to hijack every decision to accommodate Diane, who I had reluctantly asked to be my maid of honor, hoping it might help us bond as adult sisters. You can't possibly have the wedding in October, my mother insisted during an early planning call. Diane might have her first solo show that month. We're not sure of the date yet, but it would be selfish to create a conflict. When I gently pointed out that Andrew and I had chosen October because it was when we first met and when he proposed, and that we had already put deposits on our preferred venue, my mother sighed dramatically. I just don't understand why you're being so difficult about this, Eleonora. You know how important this opportunity is for your sister. The hypothetical show never materialized, but my parents' prioritization of Diane's potential plans over my actual ones set the tone for the entire planning process. Things came to a head at the wedding rehearsal. Diane, who had skipped both pre-wedding events claiming illness, though her social media showed her out with friends, arrived late and immediately began complaining about her bridesmaid dress, the hairstyle we had agreed on, and the boring ceremony format. During dinner afterward, she dominated the conversation, regaling everyone with stories of her artistic pursuits and making several pointed comments about how she could have planned a much more creative wedding if I had actually listened to her ideas. When Andrew's parents attempted to toast us, Diane interrupted with an impromptu speech about how difficult I had been as a sister, framing it as humorous but lacing it with hurtful barbs. I retreated to the restroom, fighting back tears when Jessica followed me in. You don't have to put up with this, Nora, she said firmly. It's your wedding. You're allowed to set boundaries. With Jessica and Andrew's support, I pulled Diane aside and calmly explained that if she couldn't be supportive tomorrow, I would prefer she attend as a guest rather than participate in the wedding party. Are you serious? She shrieked loud enough for everyone to hear. You're just jealous because everyone always likes me better. Mom, Dad, are you going to let her treat me like this? My parents immediately rushed to Diane's defense, my mother telling me I was overreacting, and my father suggesting I was creating unnecessary drama on what should be a happy occasion. In that moment, something shifted inside me. I looked at my family, really looked at them, and realized nothing would ever change. No achievement, no milestone, not even my wedding day would be sacred enough to warrant their respect or full attention. Despite the rehearsal drama, the wedding itself was beautiful. Diane performed her duties minimally, but without major incident, though she managed to create a scene during the reception by getting noticeably drunk and attempting to extend her maid of honor speech into a lengthy monologue about herself until the DJ tactfully cut her microphone. For our first holiday season as a married couple, Andrew and I decided to travel rather than split time between families. My parents were outraged, claiming we were abandoning family traditions. Despite the fact that holidays had always been tense, Diane-centered affairs that left me feeling depleted. "But this is the only time Diane gets to see you," my mother protested when I called to inform them of our plans. "She was just saying how much she misses her big sister." This was an obvious manipulation. Diane rarely spoke to me directly unless she needed something and had made no effort to maintain a relationship since I'd moved away. The guilt-tripping escalated over the following months. There were tearful phone calls from my mother about how I was tearing the family apart by establishing boundaries, passive-aggressive social media posts from Diane about selfish people who forget where they came from, and stern lectures from my father about my obligations to family. My therapist helped me recognize these as common tactics used to pull someone back into an unhealthy family system. "They're used to you playing a certain role," she explained during one particularly difficult session after a harrowing phone call from my parents. "When you stop playing that role, it disrupts the entire family dynamic. Their reactions are about maintaining the system, not about your actual choices." The final breaking point came when my parents called with what they framed as a small favor. Diane had apparently maxed out several credit cards and was facing collection actions. They had already leveraged their home equity to cover some of her debts but needed additional funds to help her get back on her feet. "We were hoping you could co-sign a loan," my father said casually, as if asking me to water their plants while they were away. "Just until Diane gets established with her new business idea." The business idea in question was a luxury pet accessory line, despite Diane having no experience in design, manufacturing, or business management. It was clearly another fantasy that would end like all her previous ventures, with financial disaster, and my parents left picking up the pieces. "I'm sorry, but I can't do that," I said firmly. "I love you, but I won't enable behavior that's hurting all of you in the long run." The explosion that followed was nuclear. I was called selfish, heartless, ungrateful, and reminded of everything my parents had ever done for me, a surprisingly short list when they actually tried to enumerate it. Diane got on the phone to tell me I was dead to her for refusing to help family in need. That night after the call, Andrew held me as I cried, not from sadness, but from the relief of finally saying no to the endless demands. It felt like putting down a backpack full of rocks I'd been carrying my whole life. The next morning, I made one of the hardest decisions of my life to drastically reduce contact with my family and focus on my own healing. Deciding to distance myself from my family wasn't an impulsive choice made in the heat of anger. It was the culmination of years of therapy, boundary violations, and the growing recognition that the relationship was damaging my mental health and hindering my personal growth. Andrew had recently been offered a significant promotion that would require relocation to Boston, a 12-hour drive from my parents' home in Michigan. The timing felt providential, offering a natural opportunity for a fresh start. After careful consideration, we decided to accept the opportunity. When I called to tell my parents about the move, their reaction was predictably self-centered. "How could you move so far away?" my mother demanded. "What about family holidays? What about being here for your sister?" There was no congratulations for Andrew's achievement, no questions about my job prospects in the new city, no concern about the challenges of relocating. Just immediate focus on how our decision would impact them, and especially Diane. "This is a great opportunity for us," I explained calmly. "I've already lined up interviews with several marketing firms there, and the city has an amazing art scene that we're excited to explore." "I can't believe you're abandoning your family like this," my father interjected. "After everything we've done for you." And that phrase, "everything we've done for you," had been wielded like a weapon throughout my life, though the actual evidence of their support and sacrifice on my behalf was minimal compared to what they'd done for Diane. "I'm not abandoning anyone," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "I'm an adult making a career move with my husband. We'll visit when we can." The conversation deteriorated from there, ending with my mother in tears and my father angrily declaring that I clearly didn't value family. I hung up feeling drained, but more certain than ever that creating distance was necessary for my well-being. The weeks before our move brought escalating attempts to make me reconsider. There were daily phone calls, tearful voicemails, and even unexpected visits from local relatives sent as emissaries to talk sense into me. Diane took a different approach, alternating between angry texts accusing me of abandonment and sweetly manipulative messages about how much she would miss her favorite sister. I was her only sister. When these tactics failed to change my mind, things took an uglier turn. Diane began spreading distorted versions of the situation to extended family and mutual acquaintances, portraying herself as the heartbroken sister being cruelly abandoned, and me as cold and calculating. Some relatives who had never witnessed the family dynamics firsthand began reaching out with concerned messages about how I was breaking my parents' hearts and turning my back on family values. The final straw came when I discovered that Diane had created posts on her social media accounts that contained thinly veiled references to me, including embarrassing childhood stories twisted to make me look irrational and ungrateful. After seeing this, I made the difficult decision to block my family members on all social media platforms. It was a boundary I had never imagined needing to establish, but the constant monitoring and harassment had become intolerable. Surprisingly, the person who reached out with understanding was my Aunt Sandra, my mother's older sister. She called me privately one evening about a week before our move. "I want you to know that I understand why you're going," she said without preamble. "I've watched how they've treated you all these years, and I should have said something sooner." Her words brought unexpected tears. After a lifetime of having my experiences denied or minimized, having them validated by someone who had witnessed them was powerfully healing. "Your mother was always the favored child in our family too," Aunt Sandra continued. "Our parents did the same thing to me that yours have done to you. It's a pattern that repeats unless someone breaks it." She shared stories of her own journey to establish boundaries with her parents and sister, offering both solidarity and a warning. "It won't be easy," she cautioned. "They'll try everything to pull you back into the old patterns. But stay strong, Eleonora. You deserve better than being the family scapegoat." Her parting words stayed with me through the chaos of moving and settling into our new home. "Remember, you're not responsible for fixing a family dynamic you didn't create." The move itself was liberating. Boston embraced us with its historic charm and vibrant energy. Andrew thrived in his new position, and after several promising interviews, I accepted an exciting role with a boutique marketing agency specializing in sustainable businesses. The work aligned perfectly with my values and skills, offering creative challenges and growth opportunities that my previous position had lacked. We quickly established new routines and began building a community. We found a wonderful apartment in a diverse neighborhood filled with young professionals and families, joined a local fitness studio, and began exploring weekend farmers markets and arts festivals. For perhaps the first time in my life, I felt truly free, free from the constant weight of disapproval, free from comparison, free from the exhausting role of family scapegoat. The first 6 months of minimal contact were a revelation. Without the constant drain of toxic interactions, I discovered reserves of energy and creativity I hadn't known I possessed. My work performance improved dramatically, leading to early recognition and additional responsibilities. My relationship with Andrew deepened as we explored our new city together and made plans for the future, including tentative discussions about starting a family of our own. Occasionally, I would receive updates about my family situation from Aunt Sandra, who had become something of a lifeline to my past without the toxicity of direct contact. "Your parents are struggling with Diane," she reported during one of our monthly phone calls. "She's moved back home again after losing another job. Not working, not contributing to expenses. Your mother seems exhausted, but they're still making excuses for her." According to Sandra, Diane had landed and quickly lost positions at 3 different companies within as many months. Her most recent job at a friend's boutique had ended when inventory discrepancies were discovered, though my parents vehemently denied Diane had taken anything. "She's 27 years old and acts like a spoiled teenager," Sandra confided, demanding money for clothes and entertainment, throwing tantrums when told no. "Last week she screamed at your mother for buying the wrong kind of organic juice." While part of me felt a twinge of vindication hearing about these difficulties, a larger part felt genuine sadness. The family system I had escaped was harming everyone involved, including Diane. The golden child pedestal was its own kind of prison, creating a person who couldn't function in the real world, where actions had consequences and people had boundaries. About 8 months after our move, Aunt Sandra called with concerning news. "I'm worried about the situation there," she said, her voice unusually serious. "I visited yesterday and overheard Diane yelling at your mother, not just raised voices screaming terrible abusive things. When your father tried to intervene, she called him names I won't repeat and threatened to make them sorry if they didn't give her money for a weekend trip with friends." This marked a significant escalation. While Diane had always been entitled and manipulative, outright verbal abuse represented a dangerous new development. "Your mother had a mark on her arm," Sandra continued hesitantly. When I asked about it, she gave a vague answer about bumping into a door, but the shape didn't match that explanation. The implication was clear but almost unbelievable. Had the situation deteriorated to the point of physical aggression, I felt a chill at the possibility, along with a complex tangle of emotions, concern for my parents' well-being, anger at the years of enabling that had led to this point, and uncertainty about my responsibility in the situation. "They won't talk about it directly," Sandra finished. "But I thought you should know. They've created this situation, but they might be in over their heads now." I thanked her for the information but wasn't sure what, if anything, I should do with it. I had finally established a healthy separation and was healing from decades of being the family scapegoat. Rushing back at the first sign of trouble would likely pull me right back into dysfunctional patterns. After discussing it with Andrew and my therapist, I decided to maintain my boundaries while keeping channels for emergency communication open. If the situation truly became dangerous, I wanted my parents to be able to reach me, but I couldn't sacrifice my hard-won peace by re-involving myself in their daily drama. Little did I know that the real crisis was just beginning to unfold. 18 months after leaving Michigan on a rainy Tuesday evening, as Andrew and I were preparing dinner in our Boston apartment, my phone rang with my father's number. I hesitated before answering. Our communication had been limited to brief occasional texts for nearly a year, and an unexpected call usually meant some attempt at manipulation. But something about the timing felt different. Taking a deep breath, I answered. "Eleonora." My father's voice sounded strange, strained, and almost unrecognizable. "I need your help. We need your help. It's about Diane. Things have gotten bad." The broken quality in his usually confident tone made me sit down, a wave of concern washing over me. "What's happening, Dad?" I asked, putting the call on speaker so Andrew could hear. What followed was a halting confession that confirmed my worst fears and Aunt Sandra's warnings. Diane's behavior had escalated beyond entitlement and verbal abuse to actual physical aggression. "Last week she threw a vase at your mother when we asked her to consider applying for jobs," he said, his voice cracking. "It missed, but the way she looked when she did it, I didn't recognize my own daughter." He described incidents that had been occurring with increasing frequency. Diane throwing objects, when denied money, breaking furniture during tantrums, slamming doors so hard the frames cracked, and punching walls when confronted about her behavior. "We've been walking on eggshells for months," he admitted, trying not to set her off, "but it keeps getting worse." The most disturbing revelation came next. After my parents had finally set a small boundary, asking Diane to apply for at least one job per week if she wanted to continue living rent-free in their home, she had retaliated in a way that shocked even me. She called Child Protective Services on the neighbors, my father said, the disbelief evident in his voice. Made up allegations of abuse about their kids. They've lived next door for 15 years. Their children are friends with everyone in the neighborhood. CPS figured out quickly that the report was false, but the damage to their reputation, the stress it caused them. He paused, and I could hear him struggling to maintain composure. "And then last night, when your mother told Diane we couldn't keep paying her credit card bills, his voice broke. "She pushed your mother, hard, into the counter. She has bruises all down her side." The image of my petite mother, now in her 60s, being physically shoved by her adult daughter made my stomach turn. "Has Mom seen a doctor?" I asked, professional instincts kicking in despite my emotional turmoil. "No," he replied quickly. "She doesn't want anyone to know. We've been covering for Diane for so long, Eleonora. Years, really. The drinking, the money problems, the scenes at family events. We kept thinking she would grow out of it, or that the right opportunity would come along and she would settle down." This admission that they had been hiding increasingly problematic behavior for years didn't surprise me, but hearing my father acknowledge it explicitly was unexpected. "There's more," he continued, sounding exhausted. "After the incident with your mother, I told Diane she needed to leave, that we would help her find an apartment, but she couldn't stay here anymore. She threatened to hurt herself if we abandoned her. Then she locked herself in her room for 2 days, refusing to eat or speak to us. When she finally emerged, she acted as if nothing had happened and became enraged when they tried to discuss the situation. The police came yesterday," he said, and I could hear the shame in his voice. "The neighbors called them after hearing screaming. Diane told the officers we were abusing her, showed them old bruises she claimed we had caused. They didn't believe her. We had witnesses to what really happened, but the humiliation of it all. Your mother hasn't stopped crying since." My father then revealed that my mother had experienced an anxiety attack so severe after the police left that he had taken her to the emergency room where doctors had prescribed anti-anxiety medication and recommended psychological support. "We're at our breaking point, Eleonora," he confessed. "We don't know what to do anymore. She refuses any suggestion of therapy or treatment. Gets hysterical at the mention of moving out. We're afraid of what she might do to herself, to us, to our reputation in the community." Then came the request I had been dreading since the beginning of the call. "We need you to come home," he said desperately. "You've always been able to handle her better than we could. You understand her. Maybe you could talk to her, help her see reason. Help us figure out how to fix this." The irony of this plea was staggering. After decades of dismissing my concerns about Diane's behavior and prioritizing her wants over my needs, they now expected me to rush back and save them from the monster they had created. "Dad," I said carefully, "I understand you're in a difficult situation, but I'm not sure my presence would help. Diane and I don't have the kind of relationship where she listens to me or values my opinion." "But you're her big sister," he insisted, falling back on family obligation rhetoric. "And you've always been so responsible, so good at managing difficult situations." There it was again, my reliability being weaponized to draw me back into dysfunction. The familiar pattern almost made me laugh, despite the seriousness of the situation. "What does Mom think?" I asked, trying to buy time to process my thoughts. "She wants you home too," he replied quickly. "She's too upset to talk right now, but she said to tell you she needs her daughters together again. That maybe as a family we can work through this." I felt Andrew's hand on my shoulder, a silent reminder that I wasn't alone in this decision. I told my father I needed time to consider what he was asking and would call back the following day. After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence for several minutes, trying to process everything I'd heard. "They want me to come back and fix their family crisis," I finally said to Andrew. "After years of making me feel invisible and unwanted, suddenly I'm the only one who can help." "What do you want to do?" he asked, his tone making it clear he would support whatever decision I made. That question echoed in my mind as I called my therapist for an emergency session that evening. We spent an hour unpacking the situation, examining my options, and discussing how to maintain my hard-won boundaries while offering appropriate support. "You're not responsible for solving this problem," my therapist reminded me, "but it sounds like there may be a genuine safety concern for your parents. There's a middle ground between rushing back to rescue everyone and cutting off all contact." Together, we formulated a plan that would allow me to offer concrete help without sacrificing my own well-being or falling back into old family patterns. When I called my father back the next day, I laid out clear boundaries. "I'm not moving back," I began firmly, "but I can help in other ways. I can research treatment options and family support services in your area. I can connect you with resources for parents of adults with behavioral issues. and I'm willing to participate in family therapy sessions remotely to work toward healthier communication." There was a long pause before my father responded, disappointment evident in his voice. "But we need you here, Eleonora. Your physical presence. Your sister responds differently when you're around." "Dad," I said gently but firmly, "if Diane is being physically aggressive and making false accusations, what you need isn't a family mediator. You need professional intervention, possibly legal intervention, if the behavior continues." He started to protest, but I continued, "I care about your safety and Mom's. That's why I'm not giving you what you're asking for, but what I believe you actually need." After establishing clear boundaries with my father about how I was willing to help, I began implementing the plan I had developed with my therapist. Rather than rushing back to physically insert myself into their crisis, I offered structured support that addressed the actual problems while maintaining my own emotional health. First, I arranged a video call with both my parents, bringing in my own therapist as a neutral facilitator. The initial session was tense and revealing. My parents were clearly exhausted, my mother appearing significantly older than when I had last seen her, with dark circles under her eyes and a nervous habit of checking over her shoulder as we spoke. "We've tried everything," my mother insisted tearfully. "We give her what she wants, but it's never enough. We can't even disagree with her without triggering an explosion." My therapist gently guided the conversation toward the roots of the behavior. "When did you first notice these patterns developing?" What followed was an uncomfortable but necessary examination of Diane's upbringing. As my parents described incident after incident tantrums that had been indulged, consequences that had been avoided, responsibilities that had been assumed by others, a picture emerged of decades of enabling behavior that had created the current crisis. "It sounds like Diane never developed the ability to handle frustration or disappointment," my therapist observed. "When we protect people from natural consequences, we actually prevent them from developing emotional resilience." My mother began to cry softly. "We just wanted her to be happy, to feel special." "And Eleonora," my therapist asked carefully, "what was your approach to parenting her?" The uncomfortable silence that followed spoke volumes. Eventually, my father cleared his throat. "We probably expected too much from Eleonora," he admitted. "She was always so capable, so independent." "She had to be," my therapist pointed out with professional directness. "From what I understand, she wasn't given much choice." This first session ended with homework my parents were to document Diane's behavior's triggers and their responses over the coming week, creating a clearer picture of the patterns at play. I would research resources in their area, including family therapists specializing in adult children with behavioral issues, support groups for parents, and if necessary, legal options for protection. Diane refused to participate in these sessions, which wasn't surprising. When my mother cautiously mentioned family therapy during dinner one evening, Diane reportedly threw her plate against the wall and locked herself in her room for hours, emerging only to announce that everyone was ganging up on her and threatening to tell family friends that her parents were psychologically abusing her by suggesting she needed help. Despite these challenges, we continued with regular video sessions. As the weeks progressed, something unexpected began to happen. My father, who had always been quick to dismiss my feelings and defer to Diane, started to show glimmers of recognition about the family dynamics. "I keep thinking about what you said last session," he told me during our third call, "about how different the rules were for you and Diane growing up. I didn't see it then, but looking back, I don't think we were fair to you, Eleonora." This tentative acknowledgement, while far from a full reckoning with decades of unequal treatment, was more than I had ever expected to hear from him. Meanwhile, through connections at my agency, I found a highly recommended family therapist near my parents' home who specialized in high-conflict family situations and personality disorders. After an initial consultation, this therapist suggested that Diane's behaviors aligned with several concerning patterns that would require professional intervention. "The behaviors you're describing, the rapid mood swings, the physical aggression, the threats, the inability to accept responsibility, these aren't just difficult personality traits. she explained to my parents during a joint video session. They're symptoms that require proper assessment and treatment. She recommended a comprehensive approach individual therapy for my parents to help them establish and maintain boundaries, potential legal measures if Diane's aggression continued, and a clear path to independent living for Diane with appropriate support services. The most difficult part of the plan involved housing. As long as Diane remained in my parents' home, the cycle of manipulation and abuse would likely continue. But transitioning her to independent living would require careful planning and probably significant resistance. You need to establish a timeline, the therapist advised my parents, with clear expectations and consequences. If Diane chooses not to participate in treatment or respect your boundaries, she needs to understand that continued housing with you is not an option. My parents were understandably terrified of this confrontation. What if she hurts herself? My mother asked. What if she ends up homeless? These fears had kept them trapped in the cycle for years. The therapist addressed them directly. Those are possibilities you need to prepare for, but continuing as you are guarantees ongoing harm to all of you. Sometimes the most caring thing we can do is stop protecting people from the natural consequences of their choices. Implementing these changes was not a linear process. There were setbacks, moments of doubt, and times when my parents reverted to old patterns out of fear or exhaustion. Diane, sensing the shift in dynamics, escalated her manipulative behaviors, alternating between rage, pitiful sobbing, and temporary periods of apparent cooperation that always dissolved when expectations remained firm. The breaking point came when my parents, following their therapist's guidance, presented Diane with a written agreement outlining expectations for continued living in their home, contributing to household expenses, attending therapy, and refraining from verbal or physical aggression. The document included a timeline 60 days to demonstrate consistent progress or alternative living arrangements would need to be made. Diane's reaction was explosive. According to my mother's tearful account afterward, she tore the paper to shreds, screamed obscenities, and ultimately pushed my father hard enough that he fell against a bookcase, resulting in a deep cut on his arm that required stitches. This incident finally crossed a line that even my conflict-avoidant parents couldn't ignore. With the support of their therapist, they filed a police report and obtained an emergency protective order requiring Diane to leave the home. The days that followed were chaotic and painful. Diane alternated between threatening legal action against my parents, begging for forgiveness, and spreading malicious stories about them to anyone who would listen. She temporarily stayed with a friend, but was asked to leave after less than a week due to similar behavioral issues. Eventually, with the reluctant financial support of my parents, advised by their therapist as a transitional measure, Diane moved into a studio apartment. The distance created physical safety, but didn't immediately resolve the emotional entanglement. My parents struggled tremendously with guilt and worry. Had they failed as parents? Were they abandoning their daughter when she needed them most? These questions dominated our sessions for weeks. You're not abandoning her, I reminded them during a particularly difficult conversation. You're requiring her to take responsibility for her actions. There's a world of difference between the two. Gradually, with professional support and distance from the immediate crisis, my parents began their own healing journey. My mother joined a support group for parents of adult children with behavioral issues, finding solidarity and practical advice from others who understood her struggles. My father, more private in his process, began working with a therapist specializing in trauma and family systems. As for Diane, her path forward remained uncertain. After hitting what appeared to be rock bottom, losing her apartment due to noise complaints and property damage, she finally agreed to a psychological assessment, which identified significant issues requiring long-term treatment. Whether she would commit to that treatment remained to be seen, but for the first time, there was at least acknowledgement of the problem. Throughout this painful process, I maintained my boundaries while offering appropriate support. I didn't move back to Michigan or assume responsibility for solving the family crisis, but I remained engaged in constructive ways, researching resources, participating in therapy sessions, and providing emotional support from a healthy distance. 6 months after my father's desperate phone call, the situation had stabilized. My parents were in regular therapy, learning to establish and maintain appropriate boundaries, not just with Diane, but in all their relationships. They had joined a community education group about family systems and were slowly beginning to understand how their parenting choices had contributed to both Diane's dysfunction and my withdrawal. Diane was in a structured treatment program after a court mandate following another incident of property damage. The prognosis was uncertain, but at least she was receiving professional help rather than being enabled by my parents' fear and guilt. As for me, I had my own news to share during one of our video calls. Andrew and I were expecting our first child, a development that filled me with both joy and determination to break the generational patterns of favoritism and scapegoating that had shaped my own childhood. When I shared the news, my mother's eyes filled with tears. "I hope we get the chance to be better grandparents than we were parents," she said softly. "If you'll let us try." It wasn't a full acknowledgement of everything that had happened, but it was a start, an opening toward a different kind of relationship built on respect, rather than roles on boundaries, rather than blind obligation. The journey toward healing our family would be long and uncertain, with no guarantee of the perfect reconciliation my parents might have hoped for. But the toxic patterns had been named, the enabling had been interrupted, and new possibilities had emerged from the painful crisis. As my therapist had reminded me throughout this process, healing doesn't always mean restoration to what was before. Sometimes it means creating something entirely new from the lessons of pain. I placed a hand on my growing belly, thinking about the child who would never know the pain of being the family scapegoat, or the hollow privilege of being the golden child. This baby would be seen and valued for exactly who they were, no more, no less. That perhaps was the greatest healing of all. Have you ever had to set boundaries with toxic family members like I did? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. Remember that sometimes walking away isn't abandonment. It's the only way to create space for real change. If my story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about overcoming family trauma and building healthier relationships. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I hope it helps anyone facing similar challenges to find their strength and peace.